I think that we could see in these three sessions, in these three talks, different types when leading scholars take other disciplines or concepts from various mathematics, physics, or other models, and take them into the cyber challenge in order to solve, to analyze, to model, or to do other things, and better be prepared for potential attacks and things like this. So with this, we conclude the present session. And for the next session, I would like to invite our colleague, a real supporter of and a friend of the ICRC and the activities here in Tel Aviv, Professor Jim Lewis, who is a senior fellow at the Center of Strategic and International Studies at the U.S. Naval Academy. Earlier, he worked at the Department of State and Commerce as a Foreign Service Officer and as a member of the Career Senior Executive Service. So, Professor Jim Lewis, please. Professor Lewis will take you as the moderator of the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good luck. That's frightening. How hard can it be? What I'm going to do is we have 5 speakers. I'm going to read you their bios. If their bios aren't interesting, I'll make stuff up. And then we'll call them up sequentially to speak to you on their topics. Our first speaker will be Dr. Jarno Limnell, who's a professor of cybersecurity at Aalto University and the adjunct professor at Tampere University of Technology. That's both are Finnish universities. He's the vice president of a cybersecurity firm. He holds a doctorate in military science and a degree in strategy from Finland's National Defense University, and has published a comprehensive list of works on security issues. So his most recent book is Cybersecurity for Decision Makers, which sounds perfect. Wait, Jarno, I'm going to go through the whole list and then we'll call you up. Second speaker is Herbert Lin, Dr. Herbert Lin, who's a senior research scholar for cyber policy and security at Stanford University. I've known Herb for years. He's one of the leading experts in the field. He worked previously at the National Academies of Science, where he was the chief of the Computer Science and Technology Telecommunications Board, and he's a member of the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. He served on President Obama's Cybersecurity Commission, which produced a useful report if you haven't seen it. Following Herb will be Professor Martin Libicki, also another old friend. Actually, all these guys are my friends, so that's part of why we're doing this. Martin Libicki is a professor at the U.S. Naval Academy where he teaches on cybersecurity. He asked me to plug his book, Cyberspace in War and Peace. It's actually a good book, right? Before that, he was at the RAND Corporation and is one of the leading thinkers on cybersecurity and cyber deterrence in the U.S. and the world. Steve Weber, professor at the School of Information and Department of Political Science at the University of California in Berkeley. Also an old friend, also someone who's been doing this for quite a long time. His work focuses on the political economy of knowledge-intensive industries, finance, healthcare, and the global information economy and issues relating to competitiveness. Steve was one of the recipients of the big Hewlett Foundation grants that went to 3 universities and used it to set up something called the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity at Berkeley. So he's opening sort of a new avenue here in research. And his best-known book is on open source. For those of you who, some people were asking about open source up there, Steve is the person you should talk to. Last but not least, Professor Frédéric Doucet, professor of geopolitics at Paris University and holder of the Castex Chair in cybersecurity, I got that one right, where her research deals with the geopolitics of cyberspace. Frédéric will actually show maps, which I think is great, and looks at power rivalries, confrontations between stakeholders, and cyber as a tool in geopolitical conflicts. So she manages a multidisciplinary team and also graduated from Berkeley, so she's sort of a dual university student. Why, you asking, are we all dressed up? It's not intentional. We had to go to this Munich security conference thing this morning, and they told us we had to wear ties. So I assure you, it's nice for you, but it's not our intent. With that, let me begin by calling up the first speaker, who will be Jarno. His topic will be proportional responses to cyber attack, which I think is particularly appropriate. We had a hilarious morning at the Munich security conference with the Russians complaining about proportional responses and saying that they suffered a great national tragedy 23 years ago. This is a great topic. Jarno, please.
I just got rid of my tie, so I'm more relaxed. So thank you very much, and good afternoon also my behalf. I have to say that it's always a pleasure to be in Israel, and honestly I think I come from Finland, and I can see so many similarities between Finland and Israel. Both are pretty small countries, but strong countries, very technologically advanced countries, and we take security very seriously, also in the cyberspace. So very glad to be here, but I have to tell you first that there is one big difference between my country and Israel. And that is the weather. Because this is Finnish summer, this is what we are experiencing at the moment. 12 degrees, so 20 degrees less than here in Israel, and raining. So I am very much enjoying this weather here. No hurry back home. But to be more seriously, putting in my short presentation and speech in right context, especially looking these cyber issues from the political point of view. And in Finland, we have recently looked at cyber threats strongly in the hybrid threats and hybrid warfare contexts. And I think it was no coincidence that the establishment of the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats was signed in Helsinki, in our capital, 2 months ago. And I see that this center really represents a concrete step in building resilience to hybrid threats, and also is a real boost in EU-NATO cooperation in this field. And since cyber and hybrid issues are international, of course, the response should be international too. So what really is needed also from the political point of view is the comprehensive multinational and multidisciplinary approach to these issues. Because as mentioned earlier also in this conference, many of the concepts and dichotomies what we security experts usually use, like war, peace, our side, their side, military, civilian, win, lose, those are blurring. And that is the reality where we have to create security. That's the reality where we have to be stronger also in this digital domain with cyber issues. And our opponents, states and non-state actors, they are utilizing this reality in a very active way. Like in Finland, we have experienced pretty strongly in recent years different kind of hybrid influencing. So what we should understand in this context is that cyber issues should never be separated from the political and hybrid contexts. And I think already in this morning in the Munich Security Conference, we really saw and heard that there is a lack in political understanding on these issues and political decisiveness to solve and trying to solve these issues, what we are talking about here also today. Because as my opinion, as I argue, cyberspace is primarily a political domain. And issues related to the cyberspace have vaulted into the highest realm of the high politics. It was just a few years ago when these issues were a little bit like a low politics, background noise, but nowadays part of the high politics. But as you know, there are plenty of different kind of high cyber hostilities. Just read the recent news. And the new ones are appearing constantly. And like you can see in this picture, this is from the US Cyber Command outline a spectrum of cyber operations based on past events. We can really see and summarize, maybe a little bit in a provocative way, that the non-state actors, and especially state actors, they are testing the boundaries of so-called cyber battlefield at the moment. They are testing the red lines, what they can do, in what ways the political objectives can be achieved via different digital activities. And I think from the political point of view, this raises many very important observations. And I will mention these three. First of all, political response to different kind of cyber hostilities is still an exceedingly untested phenomenon. Secondly, cyber domain is relatively new area or arena of conflict, especially for the policy makers. And the third one is that much more research is needed. Multinational, multidisciplinary research is needed in this field. Because there seems to be a situation that when we face different kind of cyber hostilities, our policy makers start to think that, okay, we have to do something, but what? And more or less all these responses, what we have observed, are done by ad hoc. Let me give you a few examples. This is a very topical issue in the Europe at the moment, election security. And I think it has been interesting to see from the Europe's point of view. I am not going to details in this, you know the story. How United States officially in several different documents, several different statements are saying that yes, we know that it was a certain country, Russia, who was interfering our elections. And I think from the researchers' point of view, these kind of statements, like from this joint statement from the Department of the Homeland Security and Intelligence Community of the United States last year, they are very strong messages what the United States is sending in this context. And saying clearly that they know who was behind these interferings. And at the same time, of course, the opponent is saying that, no, that's rubbish. Maybe some patriotic hackers have done something towards your elections, but state has nothing to do with these issues. But I think it's very interesting question in this context to think that, okay, how United States, as to my eyes the only superpower in the whole world, is responding to these kind of activities. And as we know, like the ex-President Obama said many times, there would have been proportional response to these issues. Proportional response. And as we know now what is the situation, United States expelled 35 diplomats, closed 2 compounds in United States, and put some sanctions against Russia. So not so strong message. And the same one we faced in Europe just a while ago. As you know, the campaign of the Emmanuel Macron, who is now the president of France, his emails and some documents were hacked and leaked to the public. And immediately after those leaks and hacks, the president, François Hollande, promised that France will respond to these activities. But my question is that how France will respond? So far, we haven't seen, at least publicly, any response. And this one is from last week, from European Commission. European Union has agreed a cyber diplomacy toolbox, and just last week, the Council of the European Union launched an initiative, and it hopes it will strengthen the bloc's or union's ability to deter and respond cyber threat. And as it is said in this document, a cyber attack on any member state would be met by a joint response, including sanctions. And here also the word proportionate is mentioned. But what that means in reality, if European Union or one member country really faces that kind of situation, it's unclear what sorts of tools in that toolbox will contain and what proportionate means in concrete actions. So my message here in Tel Aviv today is that we have to be able, or at least encourage our political decision makers and others to create a framework of proportionate ways to politically respond to different kind of cyber hostilities. Of course, the proportionate response is complicated, situational dependent, and it's always very political question. When we are determining appropriate responses to a cyber hostilities, I think political decision makers need to consider the following 6 variables, questions which must be answered before responding. The first one is, of course, the difficult one, the degree of the attribution. When considering proportionate response, policymakers should understand the level of the confidence they have in attributing the attack. For instance, if the level of the attribution is low, decision makers will be limited in their choice of response even if the severity of the attack is high. And of course, the governments need to calculate the costs that would incur if they wrongly attribute the attacker. The second issue, what the policymakers have to consider, is that what was the impact of the attack. They need to understand what the real impacts are, and the type and the level of the response is, of course, determined more or less by the extent of its impact. How harmful the attack has been to the national security and the society or digital services, and what kind of services are being affected. And as we very well know, it can take weeks, if not months or years, for computer forensic experts to accurately find out the extent of the damage done to the target organization's networks. When the policymakers are considering proportional response to the cyber attack, the decision is always about the options, what the state is able to do. It is said that every nation state can respond using at least 4 instruments: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. The political decision makers need to consider the full range of responses at their disposal, from a quiet diplomatic rebuke to a military strike. The fourth point is the policy guidelines. Political decision makers need to take into consideration the current national security and cybersecurity strategies, what they have outlined, and also if the state is a member of the international alliance, like in the NATO, part of the NATO, their policy guidelines must also be taken into the consideration when thinking about the proportionate response. The fifth point is, of course, always the time. How urgent is the response? How fast this kind of decision has to be made? The time is a relevant issue to take into considerations, of course, in the politics. And then, of course, political decision makers have to think about the political risk. If we do that, what that will mean in the next phase? Or what is the risk of the escalation if we respond in this determined way? And I think always, whatever the response is, the response will have an impact on the state's diplomatic relations, reputation, power, military and intelligence operations. And there are many ways, as mentioned, how a nation state can respond using these kind of different elements. And I would, like I said, I would really like to encourage the policy decision makers to think about these different variables and these different ways how to respond to different cyber hostilities. But then in politics and in cyber politics, which is increasing research branch at the moment also in Europe, there will always be flexibility depending on both current decision makers who have the power and the ambiguity of the situation. And of course, this kind of framework is different from one nation to another. And my last point, ladies and gentlemen, when we are operating in today's, like I would like to summarize, unpredictable hybrid security environment, this really needs more political expertise and preparing with these issues. And I would especially say in cyber issues. And policymakers, I would say from Finland's and Europe's point of view at least, are probably forced to conceptualize cyber war or cyber conflict definitions as a form of larger concept of the hybrid warfare. Thank you very much.